ABC News in New York. Barbara Walters.
Good evening and welcome to 2020 Friday. Hugh is on vacation. As most of you know, a private memorial service was held this morning for John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife Carolyn at a small church here in New York City. The service was attended by President and Mrs. Clinton and their daughter Chelsea, by friends and family, 25 Kennedy cousins, uncles and aunts, and those who were most immediately affected by the tragedy. All came to the church on this muggy July day, and there were prayers and memories. Senator Kennedy gave the eulogy for his nephew. It contained both humor and grief. These are some of his words. He was a boy who grew into a man with a zest for life and a love of adventure. He was a Pied Piper who brought us all along. He was blessed with a father and mother who never thought anything mattered more than their children. And for 1,000 days, he was a husband who adored the wife who became his perfect soulmate. John's father taught us all to reach for the moon and the stars, and John did that in all he did, and he found his shining star when he married Carolyn Bessette. Well, there were no cameras allowed inside, but in a few moments, one of the invited guests, Robert McNamara, a member of President Kennedy's cabinet and a lifelong friend of John Jr. and the family, will share with me his thoughts about this extraordinary day. They came, young and old, and from 3 generations of Kennedys and their friends, to pray this morning at the Church of St. Thomas More. This was John Kennedy Jr.'s parish church in his youth, a fitting choice his family felt to mourn his death and that of his wife, and to celebrate their lives. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's parents, who had lost not just 1, but 2 children, slipped into the service away from the cameras. The service was planned principally by Senator Ted Kennedy, the family patriarch, and by Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, John Kennedy's beloved sister. It was Caroline, we understand, who insisted on complete privacy for this morning's Mass. The guests, about 300 of them, were admitted strictly by invitation. But New Yorkers are an inventive breed.
Oh, Teddy boy, the pipes are calling.
Last night in Lower Manhattan, there was a public memorial Mass. It was sponsored by the Irish community, and Rodney Cook spoke on behalf of John Kennedy Jr.'s friends.
John would not want us to be saddened over his leaving us, but rather he would want to compel each of you to be the hope for our generation and nation that he was for us.
The notion of generation, of one setting an example for another, is central to the Kennedy family. John Kennedy Jr. was too young to really know his father. He had to learn about him from family friends. One of his teachers, a man close to President John F. Kennedy personally as well as professionally, was Robert McNamara. McNamara served as Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War and later admitted he had made grievous mistakes during that period. Last year, when Time magazine asked John Kennedy Jr. to make a toast at its 75th anniversary, Kennedy chose to honor Robert McNamara.
So tonight I would like to toast someone I've known my whole life, not as a symbol of a pain we can't forget, but as a man. And I would like to thank him for teaching me something about bearing great adversity with great dignity, an adversity endured only by those who dare to accept great responsibility. Bob, to you.
Did you feel as close to John Kennedy Jr. as he obviously did to you?
Well, you're referring, I think, to what he said at the Time anniversary celebration, which was a total surprise to me.
They had asked if he wanted to speak about his family.
I know that, and he said, no, I'd rather speak about Mr. McNamara, which was very, very moving to me. I hadn't worked with him closely, but I'd known him throughout his life. And I used to visit his mother when she lived in New York, moved to New York, and I would play with John and Carolyn when they were very young children. And I've watched them grow up, 2 extraordinarily graceful individuals. So I felt close to him, even though we hadn't worked closely together.
I know that the reason that you agreed to be on with us today, because at first you said no, and then you said, I will come on because I want to talk about my firm conviction that John F. Kennedy Jr. would have wanted to go into politics because the family had a dedication to service.
That's exactly why I'm here.
Yeah, okay.
That's exactly why I'm here. This family believes that public service is noble. And I think in a sense it began with Rose Kennedy, President Kennedy's mother, because he told me that his mother drilled into him that from those of us to whom much has been given, much is expected, much is required. And he repeated the same thought in a sense in that inaugural address when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think that all of the Kennedys, Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, John, all believe that. They all believe public service is noble. I believe.
And
I don't think the American people yet understand that and accept it.
Well, we have heard in recent years that public service is something that's terrible to go into, that very few people want to go into it. We've heard presidents say that.
I have heard presidents in the last 10, 15 years, several of them say that. It's wrong. It is a noble service.
What made you think in particular, though, that John Kennedy Jr. would have wanted public service?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't want to speak as an authority or an intimate of John. In recent years, I've known him all these years, and I've respected him, admired him. He was an extraordinarily graceful individual, wry sense of humor. He empathized with human beings, which is, I think, with almost all segments of our society, which is certainly one of the most important requirements for a successful political leader. But why did I think he wanted to go in public service? For two reasons. Number one, he inherited the feelings of obligation to serve, that it was a noble activity. Secondly, he was an active member of the board of the Institute of Politics, which was founded by the Kennedys and is a part of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. And he was playing an active role in that. And then finally, I had been a trustee of the Kennedy Trust for some years, and about a month or so ago, three of us, Sarge Shriver and John Whitehead and I, retired as trustees, and the family gave a perfectly beautiful dinner party in our honor. And I was told by some of his intimates that night that they were sure he would go in public service. That was my feeling.
You knew Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis so well. Do you think that she would have wanted her son to go into politics?
Well, that's a good question. I don't want to speak for Jackie. I loved her. She was an extraordinarily graceful woman. Well, I know she didn't want him to go into the theater.
And when he wanted to be an actor?
When he wanted to be an actor, that's right.
Did she say to you, oh...
well, you know, I knew that, that's right. Yeah. But would she want him to go into the answer is I don't really know. Yeah. I think she would have been proud of him had he done so, because he would have, I think, served with great skill and would have made a great contribution to our society, and she would have been proud of that.
I know that you don't want to go into great detail about the service this morning, which you were invited to attend, and you also attended the luncheon for family and friends, but can you tell us what moved you the most?
Well, I was moved by every part of it. The structure of it, the poetry, the music. The music was absolutely gorgeous, and they had, I would call it, two rap singers, and they had a guitarist. It was just lovely. The eulogies, one for Caroline.
Carolyn Bessette?
Yes,
Kennedy.
It was perfectly beautiful by a young man that I didn't know.
His name is Hamilton South.
That's right. I think he was with Calvin Klein.
Calvin Klein, where Carolyn Bessette had worked before.
That's right. Well,
he was very good.
He obviously knew her very well. I'm told he wrote it himself. I would have been very proud to have written it. And Ted Kennedy's eulogy of John was just perfect. It was emotional. It was humorous. It was really, for example, at one point he said, I said, John, I think you're going to be president someday. What will be your first act as president? And he said, well, Uncle Ted, my first act will be to call you and gloat, which I thought was a wonderful comment.
But isn't that typical of that family?
It's
that even in the greatest periods of grief, they have humor.
Exactly. Exactly.
President and Mrs. Clinton attended, and Chelsea. What were they like during the service?
They were just marvelous. They came in 10 minutes early.
Which was surprising. People
which was surprising
so often late. Yeah.
But they were very graceful, very warm. They didn't in any way try to usurp the limelight. I was very proud of them.
Mr. McNamara, you knew President Kennedy so well. You served with him in some very, very difficult times for both of you. Did you see any of his qualities in his son, or am I being too romantic about it?
Well, the son died, sadly, as a young man. But I saw many of the qualities. A wry sense of humor, an ability to empathize with all parts of our society, and an ability to not take himself too seriously. I think he would have been a great political leader.
Mr. McNamara, I know that you have probably heard or read about this so-called Kennedy curse. Do you agree with that? Do you feel that there is a black mark against this family?
Cursed? My gosh, no. They're blessed. They're doing what they want to do. They're doing what they believe in. Public service. What more can you want in life?
But there are others who do think there is a Kennedy curse. And when we come back, Bob Brown with a different perspective on this family's troubles. A renowned historian who tried to explain the repeated tragedies that seemed to surround the Kennedys, and we were struck by some of his insights about the lives and the legacy of this family.
As they gathered outside today's memorial service, and even from a distance over the sea yesterday, Americans knew without even seeing the faces, the posture, the grief of a family that had gathered in sorrow so often before. The young man whose ashes were committed to the ocean had not died in war or in public service, as his uncles and father had. But the services for him and his wife clearly echoed a recognition of the sacrifices the family had made and the presumed value of what had been lost.
It's terrible to see a young life cut off, as this has been. Awful. It's like a novel that's never finished, or a play that they stop the performance in the second act. We want to know what happens. We want to know what became of this, what is to become of this handsome, gifted young man. And we'll never know.
David McCullough is an historian who has written often about politics and whose biography of Harry Truman won a Pulitzer Prize. He is a resident of Martha's Vineyard and a friend of the Kennedys. I spoke with him by phone from New York about the litany of family tragedies that has become so unsettling and familiar to Americans.
Well, I think anyone who selects a political life is taking risks. One can die figuratively or literally in that way of life, but they believed in it. A hero is someone who takes a risk. The old definition of a hero is somebody who puts his life at risk, and who is also, in the old Greek sense, favored by the gods. And at times they seem to be favored by the gods, and that was an immense part of their charm and their attractiveness. We tend to see people of immense wealth as people who are somehow removed from the dangers, the risks, the pitfalls of life. And of course, that's fantasy. They seem to be the family that has everything. Well, they don't have everything, and one of the things they don't have is control over their own destinies, any more than anybody else does.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
And in a family known by the actions it took and not by the risks it avoided. John Kennedy Jr., when asked by Barbara Walters to describe his greatest fear, gave an answer that seemed appropriate to the character of the family.
I think that my greatest fear would be to be faint of heart and feel that, you know, I missed an opportunity, or you could have taken a path less traveled that would have ended into something completely wonderful and unexpected.
In making a reference reminiscent of a poem called The Road Not Taken, he also invoked one of his father's favorite poets, Robert Frost, whose work often seemed to embody notions the Kennedys found self-descriptive.
There's a wonderful line in President Kennedy's favorite poet, Frost. He always kept his poise to the highest branches, climbing carefully. But John Kennedy, the president, and John Kennedy Jr., both were, in effect, born in the highest branches. And poise, balance, a sense of composure as well as a physical poise, were essential to them from the beginning. But there they were on the highest branches, and it's dangerous in the highest branches.
And when they climbed into the branches, it was sometimes with a sense of excitement and purpose that brought the nation along, into space, for instance. That, too, was a Kennedy theme John Jr. echoed.
There's a movie I saw called The X-15 about the first plane in space that I saw when I was about 14 years old, and for some reason every frame of it is stuck in my head. I don't really know why.
Do you want to be an astronaut?
I think I did.
You did want to be an astronaut?
No, yeah, helicopter pilot, astronaut, something in the air.
In his eulogy today, Senator Edward Kennedy recalled the famous image of John Jr. running to his father's helicopter, and how the president remarked, "Every mother in the United States is saying, isn't it wonderful to see that love between a son and his father? Little do they know," he added, that son would have raced right by his father to get to the helicopter.
Defined by my father, political
So he carried both the symbolism in his name, and to many, the independence that set him apart. But in the volumes of words this week that sought to ascribe a place for him in the legacy, two simple ones hold the most resonance. What if?
It's filled with the powerful symbolism, the beautiful young man, the heir apparent to a great tradition of a great family, with his beloved wife, who is beautiful, flying home. Flying home is in itself a great image. Coming to a family reunion, coming to be with his family, at risk to be with his family for what is supposed to be a festive occasion. These are all the elements of a great story. And that is, I must say, a very important part of why we are so fascinated by the Kennedys.
There was something else that Robert Frost said that also has become descriptive of the Kennedys and their perseverance through their tragedies. "Always fall in with what you're asked to accept," Frost said. "Take what is given and make it over your way. My aim in life has always been to hold my own with whatever's going, not against, with."
Well, I think that in the way that they have coped with, handled so gracefully the awful tragedies and heartache, pain that they've endured, they also endured the burden, the annoyance, the nuisance of publicity, of celebrity, very well. Imagine what it would be like. We can't imagine. You can't imagine. How would you ever have a life? How would you ever be a person? How would you ever have any sense of reality? And they have done that. And I think it goes back to family. It goes back to that family. I'm annoyed by the talk of the Kennedys as our royal family. That's a lot of hooey. They're not our royal family. They are an American family. They are a great American family. And that's the point. I think the fact that they have taken all of this punishment, that they've suffered the pain of grief, the pain of loss, as they have, with no self-pity, ever. No woe is me, no why me. I think that is an example for all of us.
Indeed. When we come back, the last remaining child of JFK and Jackie. In his eulogy today, Senator Kennedy said of John, "He was a Kennedy who loved us all, but who especially cherished his sister Caroline, celebrated her brilliance, and took strength and joy from their lifelong mutual admiration society." It was Caroline who reportedly planned and wanted a private closed memorial service for her brother this morning in New York. My colleague Lynn Scher has an illuminating look at Caroline, from her White House days as the little girl to the sole keeper of her family's legacy.
In a family whose future seemed golden, she was the shining princess. At 3, she told everyone she'd gotten a baby brother for her birthday. 2 months later, she moved into the White House, the first resident toddler to trip across the South Lawn in half a century. She was the lucky little girl with the pony macaroni. Her playmate was the president.
Well, I remember, a lot of sort of things that a kid would remember. I remember going to see my father in his office, and a lot of the things that people remember seeing my brother and I do.
With her glamorous mother,
the First Lady and Miss Kennedy arrive in Rome.
and her powerful father.
I want you to meet my daughter, Caroline, and my wife, Jackie.
How do you do?
It seemed unthinkable that in far too short a time, she would be the only one left. A lesser spirit might have crumbled, but Caroline Bouvier Kennedy has drawn her strength, like her name, from two remarkable people. Which of her parents do you see in her more?
You know, we have to remember that both of them saw so little of their father. Caroline was 6, I think, when her father was murdered.
Former Ambassador William J. Vanden Heuvel has been a close friend of the Kennedy family for decades.
Well, when you see those poignant photographs of Caroline with her father on the sailing boat, for example, I mean, you have to understand the terrible void that had to mean in her total life, not to have the father who obviously loved her so much and whom she loved so much, although she could not embrace him.
When you see Caroline, when you spend time with her, do you see her mother in her?
I see her mother and her grace and her wonderful literary background and in those interests, and I see her father in her looks. I see both her father and mother in her looks, those beautiful eyes, and she carries the legacy of both of them awfully well, physically and intellectually.
Her mother protected her fiercely, deftly keeping the children away from cameras. When she married Greek shipping tycoon Aristotle Onassis, she took Caroline and John with her to their remote island hideaway. Photographer Peter Beard often traveled with the family and took these rarely seen photographs.
We used to go out every day on the Caroline, SS Caroline, water skiing, swimming, and diving off the mast of the Caroline. This is the two of them together. I mean, you can just see they're just completely at ease and full of humor.
That was her mother's plan, to raise the children as normally as possible.
There was a point in Caroline's life where there was almost an instant transformation, and she became this beautiful young woman. And I don't know whether Jackie had a role in that or particularly, but it was striking to me at the time, and it's of course continued.
So much of her life has been influenced by her mother, the private way she's raised her 3 children, the public dignity when her mother died.
I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help.
Today at 41, the words that are used most often to describe Caroline are these: solid, self-assured, content, private, very private. She's even co-authored a book on that subject, as well as one on the Bill of Rights.
Caroline is the most unpretentious person, and at the same time strong and resolute and so intelligent.
Is she just like you and me? Is she just folks?
And I think anyone who meets her and knows her feels exactly that way about her. Like John, I think, both of them certainly had to be aware of the fact that they were celebrities and that they are pointed out and that people immediately recognize them. But that is not used in any way to advance the things that they're interested in.
Caroline's interests have focused on the arts, ballet, historic preservation, things her mother cared about. But she's also deeply involved with the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation in Boston, serving as its president. She sees it as a way to carry out her father's dream.
I think his greatest legacy is the way that he inspired so many people, and particularly young people, to get involved in politics and public service.
Caroline's work on the library, like so much she has done, was in collaboration with her brother John.
She had an unusually close relationship with her brother, with John. I mean, when you think of what the two of them have gone through, the shared confidences, the shared experiences, the possibility that they could say to one another what they could never say to anybody else. To have lost something like that is a terrible loss and irreplaceable, frankly.
But for all she has lost, all she has endured, Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg seems unusually, perhaps innately, prepared to fulfill her family's legacy in her own way.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
I think she will continue the course she was already set upon, which was an extraordinary course and a very purposeful one and a very effective one. But now she'll have to carry on for both of them.
Lynn Shearer joins us now. Lynn, we shouldn't just think of Caroline as the last remaining member of her family.
Oh, no, Barbara. She is so much more than that. And, you know, for all of her love of privacy, she is neither shy nor aloof. Today, after the service, as her car was pulling out, she rolled down her window, smiled, and waved at the crowds. And they just burst into applause and waved right back. This is a woman who is clearly of this world.
This morning when we were reporting, we didn't see their three children, Caroline and her husband's children, entering the church, but they participated in the service.
And these children are not only her link to the future, but very much her link to the past. The oldest girl is named Rose, after her grandmother, the middle child, Tatiana, and the young man, the little boy, is named John, and of course, he's called Jack.
Thank you, Lynn. We'll be right back.
Coming up, outrageous allegations of corporate payoffs to keep the price of life-saving drugs sky high. Are you paying too much for your prescriptions?